now, let's dive into our first panel, which will take us to the next frontier, space. So space exploration offers significant economic and technological opportunities from satellite technology to resource mining. And investing in space innovation in a sustainable manner can drive economic growth, foster international cooperation, and address global challenges like climate change and also connectivity. So this panel will examine the potential for different countries and enterprises to come together and collaborate in the area of space for the benefit of mankind. So it is now my honor and pleasure to welcome on stage our first panel. Our moderator, Professor Yang Gao, Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and our panelists, Ms. Katherine Courtney, Chair of Global Network on Sustainability in Space, Professor Xurong, Dean of School of Aerospace and BDS Technology at Guangdong Industries Polytechnic University, and also Dr. Adam Janikowski, founder and managing director from BDG Capital. So please start our first panel.
Good morning, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Yang Gao. It's a pleasure to be your moderator today on this pivotal discussion on the promise of space, breakthroughs, and potential. As a space roboticist based in the UK for the past over 20 years, I had the privilege to have worked on European space missions from Earth's orbit to the Moon and Mars. Very recently, I joined Hong Kong University of Science and Technology as a professor in aerospace engineering with a vision to help develop Hong Kong's capability in space, as well as foster international collaboration. I have witnessed firsthand the evolution of space from being a distant frontier decades ago to now hosting critical and societal infrastructure. This transformation is not just technological, it is personal to everyone in this room and in our society. For example, if you are using the weather forecast or navigating using Beidou or GPS, or live streaming events like today online, you are relying on space infrastructure. And it is very important to say that space now truly become the backbone of modern life. The topic of this panel couldn't be more timely, as we are standing at this critical moment where the space capability is thriving with unprecedented commercial investment and evolving governance frameworks. We must collectively examine how these factors will drive humanity's path in space. The decisions we make now is going to have a profound impact on the generations to come. We are very fortunate to be joined by 3 experts on these critical issues. Firstly, allow me to introduce Ms. Catherine Courtney. Catherine's leadership as a former CEO of UK Space Agency and the current chair of Global Network in Sustainability of Space positions her as a leading voice on how to balance rapid technological advances with responsibilities for space environment. Her work on mentoring future space leaders through STEM initiatives also further ensures the continuity of this vital work. We are also equally honored to welcome Professor Xurong, who is an expert in China's Beidou system that not only transformed the regional capability, but also changed the global landscape. As a deputy chief designer of Beidou monitoring system and the former co-chair of UN's ICG working group, Xurong brings unparalleled insights into the technological excellence and international cooperation. We are also very privileged to have Dr. Adam Janikowski, whose exceptional career in investment banking spans across North America, Europe, and Asia, and now include financing the next generation of space enterprises. Adam's unique perspective bridges the critical intersection of technological potential and sustainable commercial models. A very warm welcome to our three distinguished panelists. So with all this expertise in the room, let's begin with today's central question. What is the most important transformation happening in space today? Xurong, could you kick us off with some insights on the Beidou system, for instance, that can revolutionize the connectivity and low-altitude economy, please?
Okay, thank you, Professor Go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As we all know that space has already benefited us more and more in terms of not only for our better life and also for our society's sustainable development. Yeah. So according to some materials that the commercial aerospace industry growing very rapidly in recent years. So I have given here some digital numbers. And at this moment, as we talk about the global development trends, now the low Earth orbit constellation deployment, and also the commercialization of deep space exploration is our development strength. That's also remind us the opportunity for our to focus on. Now, I'd like to talk about more in China. So, so in China, the most core areas regarding the space is the satellite applications, such as the satellite navigation and the satellite Earth observation, and even the communications. So, and in China, the commercial aerospace industry and low altitude economy has been taken as the national strategic emerging industry. And that means a lot of policies from local government and also central governments have been released to support. Yeah. So regarding the market size and the capital investment in China, we can see that the market size is expanding very rapidly, and with nearly a 20% increasing rate annually. And also we know that from the capital investment side, we can see that now in China, not only the state-owned enterprises, but also the private enterprises have been come out. So now I'd like to let me talk a little bit more about the China's Beidou satellite navigation system and its related time and space service industry. So according to the white paper just released the day before yesterday by China Association of GNSS and Location-Based Service. So from the white paper, we know that the BDS related industry with up to more than 7% annually increasing rate. And now, at the beginning of this year, we have in China, BDS companies is about 20,000. And the number of people engaged in is about 1 million. And also the BDS user devices is around 2 billion. So this is the most recent digital facts about the BDS industry in China. So if we talk about the BDS related space and time service industry, that means we usually use the PNT as the space and time service industry. That means P means positioning, and N navigation, and the T means timing. Yeah. So when we talk about GNSS system, we usually refer to the PNT service. That is the space and time service industry. So according to the some statistical digitals, we can see that at the beginning of this year in China, the market size is about 1,000 billion Chinese yuan. In addition to that, and more new applications regarding the BDS system has already emerged, such as space probe, and also the distress alarm, and search and rescue in maritime, and also two-way communications. This is the new application services regarding the BDS system. So regarding the next generation BDS system, we can see that we will a more precise and reliable and more intelligent, flexible, and even ubiquitously accessible video system is on the way to us. So we have, for this kind of new generation, we can see that in one verse, the next generation BDS system will give us globally with the decimeter level real-time positioning services. So here, I'd like to quote some digital numbers from ESA. Now, we can see that about 10% of our GDP relies to some extent on the PNT service. That means GNSS-related industries. And in which about 9% of the GNSS market is rely on mass market. So I think investment focused on the GNSS-based PNT service is most important for us to consider, to focus on. And in addition to that, I'd like to a few sentences about the low-altitude economy in China. Yeah, and China may be the main market in low-altitude economy deployment, with about at the moment, with the annual increase rate is about 30%. So let me come to my a brief conclusion and recommendations here. First off, let me borrow a sentence from Mr. Adam. Yeah. So how about to establish a joint working group to address the space application and for Hong Kong's opportunity, such as how about we think about to establish a space and time intelligence innovation harbor in Hong Kong toward for serving the emerging market countries. So, such as we can do the following things. First of all, we can to develop, to promote the space and time intelligence technical exchange in this platform. And also we may develop vocational education and talent training programs for this kind of platform. And also because Hong Kong is very international, so hope that we use this kind of innovation center, innovation hub to give the emerging market countries for the training like the internationally recognized standards, and also for academic exchanges. So that's all for my opinion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Xurong, for the very informative talk and the recommendation. That sounds like a brilliant way forward to bring different stakeholders together. So let's turn to Adam now. How is the surge of commercial investment reshaping space sector? What opportunities does this create?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the organizers, Ms. Ip in particular, for putting such an important topic on the Global Prosperity Summit agenda. I think it's very important. And as I listened to the keynote speech this morning, a lot of the thoughts are actually quite relevant to commercial space and what is the new reality for space. So my doctorate is in the commercialization of space, and it is looking at the transition from public to private funding of space, which I think, to answer one of the big questions of this panel, is what is the biggest transition? We are seeing an inflection of moving towards private funding. And as you can see from the quote behind me, the first trillionaire there will ever be is a person who exploits the natural resources on asteroids. I'm going to paraphrase that, and it's going to be the first person who can harness commercial space. And given that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are respectively the richest and second richest people in the world, I think this is absolutely true given their commitment to the space economy. But how do you think about investable space? Now I have 5 minutes to teach you about a whole brand new economy which is actually here. So I hope you can take away from this and learn that investable space is now. It is an opportunity, and it's something we need to all be involved in, particularly as Hong Kong. I'm very, very bullish on Hong Kong, and I think Hong Kong has an incredible opportunity to be a leader here. So how do you think about investable space? It's not asteroid mining that you see in science fiction. There is a great opportunity for mining water on the moon. That's going to become in the near term. There's a great opportunity for mining helium-3 on the moon and bringing it back. It's very important to our economy here. But that's really the only things we're going to be mining, and that's not now. Now we have infrastructure, distribution, and applications. Infrastructure is the hardware and software. Groups like SpaceX, we all would have heard of, Maxar, which makes satellites. Distribution, that is Earth observation. That is how do we use what's in the sky and commercialize it here on the ground. And then, of course, applications, specialized hardware and software. Uber, the payment system, Octopus, all of these are space. We are living in a space economy now. And it's quite impressive when you actually think about these opportunities, how much they touch on our everyday. And we're starting to see that economy become more and more important. So investment. When you look at investment, how much has actually been invested in space? Well, based on these structures and the data from Space IQ, which is an American group that I work very closely with and has helped me in a lot of my research, since 2009, we've seen $347.9 billion US dollars be invested in over 2,197 companies. That's a pretty large economy that's already existing. In Q1 of this year, we saw $4.3 billion invested in over 104 companies. And as you can see, there's a breakdown of what those investments actually look like. But what are the opportunities? And this slide is taken directly from my research, published research, where I asked several stakeholders within the space community globally, within the new space economy globally, from lawyers, regulators, space agencies, entrepreneurs, which we like to call astropreneurs. What is the opportunity? And really where we're starting is water and energy. And water and energy could be the in situ economy up in orbit, or it's actually energy down here. And we'll talk a bit about it more, I hope, but that's even data centers. We're starting to see data centers, which is one of the most investable opportunities now in terrestrially, to be located in space where energy is cheaper, cooling costs are cheaper, it's better for the environment. After that, people think space habitat and telecommunications are the most investable pieces of space, followed by environmental. I was sitting beside someone, we were talking, a climate scientist. We were talking about the opportunities Earth observation has for climate science. There are a lot of opportunities that we're seeing in space, and this is what the incumbents, the people who are already practicing space, this is where they see the opportunities. But there's challenges. And those challenges are primarily financing and legal and regulatory. Almost half the respondents pointed out financing and legal and regulatory as the big, actually 60% of the respondents pointed out these two. This, again, we'll talk about it, and I hope we can continue the conversation, but this is where Hong Kong has a major advantage with its rule of law and many other advantages it has, its location, its partnerships, its alliances. And where's China in all this? Excellent discussion earlier. I'm going to talk about the privatization of the private commercial space. And as you can see, most people don't know, China has a commercial and a space business going back to the 1950s. In the 1970s, Deng Xiaoping actually created an SOE to export Chinese satellite and launch technology. So we have, that's a 55-year history of commercial space in China. In 2014, China published Document 60, which basically deregulated and allowed for the privatization of commercial space companies. Because of that, we saw the latest numbers I could get were from 2020, where there was over 140 private commercial space companies active in China. Since 2020, in the last 5 years, I'm positive that number has ballooned. And as you can see from the slide behind me, over the last 4 years, we've seen over 15 trillion yen be raised over a significant number of funding rounds. Which brings me to what I feel very strongly about, which is Hong Kong, but the opportunity that also Hong Kong has. With several people in this room, Iñaki Amate, who's one of the organizers of this, Professor Quentin Parker from Hong Kong Laboratory for Space Research at Hong Kong University, and Mahesh Harilela, we brought all of the stakeholders together in commercial space here in Hong Kong, even if they didn't know they were involved in commercial space. The Venture Capital Fund, the Underwriters Association of Hong Kong. We put them together in a room and came up with a workshop such that we could cut through the noise and come up with policy recommendations for the Hong Kong government. And I was delighted to see you stole number one, borrowed, took, jointly worked with. Establish a working group to address space in Hong Kong's opportunity. Hong Kong is blessed. We are blessed with rule of law. We are blessed with incredible partners. We are blessed with very, very deep capital markets. And we have an opportunity to be the Asia commercial space hub. And we have a roadmap in Luxembourg, what they've done before, and we can talk about that in the Q&A. But Hong Kong has a huge opportunity that I really hope we take advantage of. And so number one was to establish a working group. We need to provide suitable and adequate investment policies and incentives for new space. My research, my statistical research shows that when countries enact policies for new space, you start to see investment in that, in their aerospace and technology sector immediately. We should encourage the government for capital allocation, the capital allocators to fund Hong Kong-based funds to invest locally in new space projects. Streamline legal and compliance, arbitration, and regulatory frameworks. We have many excellent tertiary universities. We need to establish new space programs. And really, and incredibly importantly, we need to leverage and combine our strengths as a superconnector. Hong Kong is, between the GBA, between our alliances, between our trade alliances that were spoken about this morning, Hong Kong has this incredible advantage. And I very much hope that we take advantage of it. And I see the movement. This panel alone is a fantastic indicator that we are moving in the right direction to take advantage of commercial space. So I'm very excited to hear from the rest of my panelists, and we will move on from here.
Thank you, Adam, for the compelling vision being shared. So, Katherine, we heard from the previous two colleagues talk about technological advances and all those potentials. And how do we ensure this expansions are sustainable? What frameworks and policies are needed to balance progress with responsibilities?
Thanks, and I wanted to really thank the organizers and Regina for putting this topic at the top of the agenda. What's going on in space today is as disruptive as the advent of the internet for all of our daily lives. All the speakers have talked about just how dependent we are on space. It's something that we don't pay much attention to, but actually, if you have ever done any online shopping and had something delivered somewhere, that relies on space. I couldn't have gotten through the pandemic without those services. So I think it's important that we remember this. Every single timestamp on every trade on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange that says whether the trade happened 1 second before or 1 second after the market has closed. Those signals are synchronized through satellites. There was a study in 2023 in the UK, well, there was an earlier study, but updated in 2023, that determined that just 1 day's loss of those navigation signals that Xurong was describing would cost the UK economy £1.4 billion a day. And so the impact of us not keeping all of this sustainable is critical. We would lose access to emergency services. We would lose weather reporting. We would lose all of the benefits from space if we cannot continue to develop this in a sustainable way. It's terribly important for trying to manage the health of this planet as well. Almost 50% of the essential climate variables that we use to measure climate change can only be observed from space. And I think people need to recognize really just how critical it is, both to global prosperity, but also just our daily lives, how dependent we are. So I want to talk a little bit about how important it is. I'll find one of these. To the rest of the world, not just the modern economy, but every single of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals is supported in one way or another by services and data delivered from space. So we use those services to combat, as I mentioned, climate change, but really importantly, also to try and combat natural disasters, food insecurity, water scarcity, and now, really importantly, trying to combat digital exclusion, the number of people around the world who are cut out of the global economy because they don't have access to the internet. Satellites are providing solutions to all of those. Now, it's a very exciting current activity that's been described about the satellite population has more than doubled in the last few years. Very hard to read a graph like this from the far corners of the room, but the important thing I wanted to point out is that this is from the latest European Space Agency Space Environment Report, and what you can see is everything at the far end above the dark blue bars, which are the active satellite population. All the rest of that can basically be described as space junk. Those are inactive satellites. Those are satellites that no longer work, and fragmentation and debris from old things that have been launched over the years. Currently, nations around the world have submitted plans to launch more than 1 million satellites in the coming years. You can see how rapidly the population is growing in space. And this chart only shows the 40,000 objects, roughly 40,000 objects, that can be tracked. At the moment, our technology only allows us to track things about the size of an orange or larger. But the European Space Agency estimates that there are over 140 million pieces of debris that we can't track. These are the smaller pieces of debris. But even something the width of a human hair can cause fatal damage to a satellite when it's traveling at 8 kilometers per second. And so the important aspects of how we manage debris is really critical. Just last year, there was a very near miss between a dead Russian satellite, which weighed 2 tons, and a NASA satellite weighing 1.5 tons. They came within 10 meters of each other. So if you could see 2 very, very large, heavy objects in this room, one over there and one over there, coming very close to crashing into each other, if they had collided, that could have caused a huge cloud of debris. And there is a theory that was proposed by Donald Kessler, a US astrophysicist, called the Kessler syndrome, that we worry about a lot in space, which simply states that a major collision could create such a cloud of fragments, all hurtling around at 17,600 miles an hour, that it could cause a chain reaction of collisions, which would make space unusable for generations. We don't know how we would solve that problem. And today, scientists are debating whether that's already happening because of the debris population at some orbits. The European Space Agency's latest report theorizes that if we stopped launching right now, today, the debris population would still continue to grow. And so we need solutions for that. We cannot take the risk of the clock being turned back to the 1950s, where we all try and find our way with paper maps and get our news reports from the newspaper when it eventually turns up. So let me just talk for another minute about risks. We have this risk of congestion, risks of debris collisions. There's also, I think, a lack of attention paid to space weather. I mean, the sun's activity has the force, every solar event has the force of millions of nuclear bombs. When those magnetic particles reach our near-Earth environment, or even reach Earth, we see that sometimes as beautiful lights in the night sky. But actually, this is washing huge energy particles, clouds, over those satellites, and that can damage the satellite's operating systems and take them out of commission. And yet, space weather forecasting is still quite an immature science. In 2024, in May, there was a big solar storm, and what we found was that thousands of satellites of those 10,000 started maneuvering all at the same time. Why? Because they are now using artificial intelligence for automated maneuvering systems. However, those satellites don't communicate with other constellation networks to say where they're going to move. So this points out for me the big problem, which is about information sharing. And with all of the increasing importance of space for commercial services, as my fellow panelists have described, there's also increasing investment in space for national security purposes. With all of that investment going in, it's more and more important that we try and focus on how we make that growth sustainable. I should also point out that there are now more humans in space than there ever were in the past. There are more research stations. There are more humans traveling for tourism purposes into space. Mm-hmm. That has a real implication for how we manage that environment in the future. So space has no borders. By definition, it's a global commons. And we do have laws, we have governance for space, but a lot of those laws, the key law that regulates space was drafted in 1967, the Outer Space Treaty. And nearly every UN member state has acceded to that treaty. There have been a few in the 1970s subsequent conventions and other agreements that govern the way we carry liabilities in space and the way we use space. But this is a long time since the 1960s, when there were just a few spacefaring nations and a few objects in space. We now have a situation where the space economy is 80–90% commercial operators from all over the world, and we urgently need to update the governance systems. So we need to move from voluntary guidelines today, best practice, and sharing information on a need-to-know basis. I will say that the global navigation satellite system, which Xurong described, that's an area where globally operators are very good at sharing information. It's well-established channels for doing that. In low Earth orbit, not so much. We're not so good at sharing information yet for those huge number of satellites that are now operating closer to the Earth. We need much better monitoring systems so we actually can see what's going on in space, and we understand the debris population, in particular the currently invisible debris population. China and the US have very complementary technologies for this space situational awareness, but unfortunately there's very little information sharing between those two systems. That's something that I think we need to fix. And I think very importantly, we need to move into formalizing agreements about how we have space traffic control in space the way that we have it for air, for sea, for road, for rail, and all the other areas of travel and transport. And I will say that I'm excited about the possibility in 2027 of the UN holding what will only be the fourth ever all-member UN gathering in Vienna. It will be called Unispace 4, a big conference to try and tackle some of these problems and forge global agreements for space sustainability. And then finally, as Young will know, we really need the technology to clean up the debris and to just much more and automatically and effectively manage the use of space. Final thought from me, if we can solve all these problems to sustain the growth of the space economy now, we also need to be thinking about these exciting new opportunities on the moon and Mars, and the further opportunities that entrepreneurs are investing in, and investors are putting their money into. The same solutions won't work out there in interplanetary space that we are trying rapidly to develop for our near-Earth space. So we need to keep that in mind for 15 years from now when that starts to become the problem for sustainability. Over to you.
Thank you, Katherine. Fascinating insights. That leads us comfortably to some common topics, I think, identified by all the speakers so far in a kind of more interactive dialogue among yourself. So let's dive into some of those common issues. I think regional influence has been mentioned quite a lot so far. So what regional initiative are influencing the global space norm? Thoughts?
Maybe, if you don't mind, I'll take this one to start. It's very interesting. I think we're all agreeing up here. It makes for a boring panel, but it's very validating that we have very similar thoughts, including updating space legislation. And if we don't do it as a global commons, we have to do it individually. And what we're also seeing, very similar to the keynote speech this morning, we're seeing a bipolar world. I quite often use the word bifurcation of the space economy. There are two markets now. One is, I like the word Kazakhstan as the middle, because Kazakhstan was obviously a big launch site during the Cold War, but the Middle East and Asia are on one side, and Europe and America are on the other side. That's the bad news. Information sharing is not that strong. But the good news is we're starting to see some really interesting things. Out of the US, we're seeing the Artemis Accords. They're leading in the Artemis Accords. A group of 40 countries have signed on, and you can think of it as the WTO of space. We're starting to see commercial space, things like SpaceX, which you've all heard of. They're providing a playbook for commercial space, which groups like Hong Kong and Asia can actually learn from. Luxembourg has a very commercial space focus. Hong Kong and Asia can learn from that. There's a roadmap for us to take advantage. What we're seeing in Europe is they're leading in regulation, sustainability regulation. And the same way we saw in ESG and in green finance, what Europe did and the regulation that they put in is going to trickle through on both sides of this divide that I just spoke about. In the middle, Asia's a very, very hot part of the world. You see Japan focusing on lunar logistics. You see the Beidou system and China's Belt and Road being exported globally. You see India just opening up its space program to commerciality. In the Middle East, it's fascinating. They're creating a space free trade zone. And that's in the UAE. Saudi Arabia is writing checks to commercial space like Axiom, very large checks, to attract commercial space to their part of the world. But again, we talked in the morning about the Global South. The Global South is doing some incredible things. There's now an African Space Agency, similar to the European Space Agency. Nigeria has created a $200 million domestic satellite industry, where they've taken technology transfer, and they're applying Nigerian wage costs to it, 20% of what a Western wage costs for the same kind of product. The regional initiatives are everywhere. What we need to do is start to consolidate them, make sure they're speaking with each other, and make sure that we're doing all of this on behalf of the global commons. And again, I'm going to continue to say it until you're sick of hearing it. Hong Kong has an amazing opportunity to take advantage of this. So please add as you will.
I would just add that I always make a plea for the United Nations, for these multilateral fora. It's very important that, for instance, the Global South, has a voice in discussions about norms and responsible behavior in space. These are emerging space nations that don't have the same number of assets up there and haven't got the same depth of expertise. But as space has become so important to the modern economy, if those nations do not have a voice in how governance is shaped going forward, then they are locked out of the benefits from space. And I think it's terribly important that we try and support the UN's efforts to bring the parties together and work through those multilateral fora, because we will never get binding rules of the road for how we use space unless we do them through those sort of channels. The important thing is to bring the commercial operators in space into that dialogue, onto the table. It's very difficult for a UN representative in Vienna to know enough about what's going on in space to make clear decisions on behalf of their government. Really important that that dialogue between policymakers and industry and investors is taking place so that everybody is working from the same level of understanding.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. Just to take Katherine's last point about the developing region and emerging economy, bring them into the this whole space arena. So, how about the space infrastructure? How can they better serve the developing and emerging economy?
I would definitely go back to my slide on the UN SDGs. Now for things like disaster recovery, monitoring soil health, migration, education, being able to bring internet into schools and being able to bring even, opportunities like power supplies and things like that, which up until now there are many parts of the world that have been excluded. Space infrastructure has become essential to those things. But that brings me back, I'll keep banging the drum for governance, brings me back to why those countries need to have a seat at the table when we try and modernize our regulations for space, so that it's not just the advanced economies that already have thousands of assets up there that are setting the rules of the road and excluding those developing countries who stand to gain so much from being included.
Superb, yeah. Can the commercial growth and sustainability be reconciled in the space domain?
I'm going
Should we
to
feel
let my colleague on the
positive
panel,
or reserved? Is our thoughts on that?
I have to say, they have to be, but I would like to hear from other panelists.
Yes, actually, so for myself, it's really familiar with the navigation satellite area. So according to my knowledge, from the UN side, actually they have proposed many measures to promote the space industry and also for the some undeveloped areas developing. So such as for the GNSS system, we have several how to say it, maybe initiatives such as the UN encourage every GNSS providers to follow some rules in order to make their GNSS providers for the systems of compatibility and also interoperability. So every GNSS providers, including China, USA, and also they all obey these rules in order to make the system more compatible and more interoperable to promote their service performance and also to benefit the mankind. And also in China's side, according to my know, we have proposed several initiatives to some countries, such as the Belt and the Road. We have proposed several space cooperation projects, and we not only provide the technical support, but also maybe the financial support to that different regions. And every year we have organized several maybe summit meetings, such as the summit, the symposium between China and Arab countries. So I think this may be the main measures to promote the service, the performance also for the regional society development, I think. Yeah.
Excellent.
And if I may, I would also add that I think sustainability, you're asking about the reconcilability. Can sustainability and commercial growth be reconciled? And the answer is absolutely yes. Space sustainability is good business. SpaceX, the most valuable space company in the world. How do they make their money? Well, they're funded by the US government through contracts, but they won those contracts because they deliver launch costs at 60% to 80% lower than the US government could fund them. That's sustainability. That's good business. That's made a lot of people very, very wealthy. If you think about sustainability and debris, right now we can't insure most satellites. The insurance won't touch them. Well, we could lower satellite costs, lower launch costs if we were able to provide insurance. But we need to be able to mitigate debris. We need to have a sustainable low Earth orbit. That's very, very important. If the Kessler syndrome does occur, we will likely go back to a technological advancement that we had in the 50s and 60s, not one that we have in 2025. So it's cheaper to avoid this problem than it is to not avoid the problem. It's cheaper to move a satellite or to mitigate debris than it is to launch another satellite. So the reconciliation is actually what the English word is a no-brainer. Sustainability needs to be hand in hand with commercial growth, or we won't have a space economy.
I'll just say that responsible investment, investors and insurers, the financial markets actually have a huge amount of leverage over what satellite operators are doing today, and launch operators as well. I mean, as Adam says, of the 10,000 satellites that I showed on that chart, only 300 are insured, and most of those are the big, expensive ones that are a long way away and have a lot of space around them. In low Earth orbit, where about 9,000 of them are getting more and more crowded, only about 50 of those satellites are covered by insurance. And under the liability convention, the people who underwrite any costs above whatever the actual operator has insured for is the taxpayer, because the licensee state who has licensed that satellite carries unlimited liability for damages caused by that satellite. So it's another area where we really need to get the financial community to talk with the space scientists and the commercial operators and have more of that dialogue. That is something that I think Hong Kong really could do that would help accelerate progress for sustainability, is to provide that bridge for dialogue and host and be a convener for bringing those stakeholders together.
Super connector is the word we like to use.
Super connector, as we heard yesterday.
That's a brilliant, I think, note to end this part of the panel. Thank you for your contributions. I can already see that the audience has been stimulated by this conversation. There's a long list of questions being submitted by them. Given the time constraint, I think we might have time to address a couple of them. I think one question is, I think, very much linked to many things you guys have said about the new international treaty and agreement by different stakeholders that are needed in place. So they would like to know your thoughts on what exactly those treaties, could cover, and how we can, do things to achieve such a progress, if you like.
I mean, it's a very simple answer to a very complicated question, but if you think about maritime governance and regulation, we have very clear law of the sea. We have very clear law about the use of airspace, and we don't really have that for space. And what we need is, we have a treaty that says we're going to develop space for peaceful uses, but actual laws of the road about who gets to put what in which orbit, and how long they have to be there, and do they need to tell other people when they are going to be there. Those are all just guidelines, voluntary guidelines. And many nations have started to embed best practice in their national space law, which is a critical first step. But to really have a global consistent set of rules of the road, we need something like the Chicago Convention, which established the International Civil Aviation Organization. I am hopeful that Unispace 4 in 2027 can at least start agreement and consensus building towards something like that, because we need a non-military, intergovernmental, independent authority that can regulate space and monitor compliance with those regulations. And to achieve that, that's what the treaty needs to deliver. How we make that happen? Dialogue and consensus building, communication.
Where I can see Hong Kong can definitely play a role to facilitate that.
And I don't see that happening. I don't think multilateral diplomacy is going to solve this. It will be driven by commercial aspects, and it'll be driven, in my opinion, it'll be driven by multilateral commerce. That's where we're going to start to see space. Those best practices will morph into multilateral organizations that are running the commerciality of space. One of the things that I'm advocating for is a space bank, very similar to the Beijing-led AIIB, which will help fund and also provide best practices for multilateral space practices. And also, you mentioned the Global South and how we don't want them to be left behind. Space cannot be a new colonial land grab for the rich. We can't have India, China, the US, Japan grabbing all the resources and leaving the rest of the world. So we need to develop these multilateral organizations, but I do think they need to be commercially led. Because if you look at the Moon Treaty, people are unsigning the Moon Treaty. They're coming out of the Moon Treaty. How does that work if we have a multilateral diplomacy-led commons regulation? We need to make it applicable to everybody, and that's commercially, in my opinion.
I don't disagree, but I think, unfortunately what's happened in the past, why do we have a civil aviation organization that is cross-border? We have it because some people died. And God forbid we wait until some humans die in space because we are mismanaging the space environment. I think we need both. I think we need commercial-led initiatives to collaborate and share information and share the space in space, but we also need diplomacy so that we can embed legal frameworks because commercial operators can't enforce compliance on other commercial operators. They haven't got that authority. So I think we need both.
I can get behind that. And if you look at the world right now, 5 countries have passed their own individual space resource legislation laws. And those are the ones where the investment is coming. And so if that becomes best practices, then we need to be following that, and that's where the diplomacy will then come in.
I can already see this dialogue can carry on after the panel, so the audience are very welcome to engage with our panelists in this debate, which is fantastic. I love the fact there's something coming from the audience recognizing space could be the interdisciplinary thing. So there's a question about, is there any space for art and artists? I guess the short answer is...
Well, the short answer is yes.
Yes, absolutely. We shall have more artists to join the venture. Yeah, please. Come to the university academics, come to the commercial experts, let's have a dialogue, let's start a conversation. So this would lead me to some of the, should we say, concluding notes or summary of, I think, that capture the core messages. And there's no doubt we're talking about space leading to global consequences. I think just, hearing from our panelists' dialogue, it seems to indicate we are looking at a cross-sectoral partnership that would involve government, commercial, and academic players. What we really are hoping for is a shared vision. A collaborative approach is really the answer for long-term sustainable space development. To build that shared future in space, I think, as you hear already from the panelists, we want to innovate responsibly, collaborate globally, invest strategically. So with that, I would like to conclude the panel. I would like to thank our brilliant panelists and all of you for joining. Enjoy the rest of your summit. See you around.